All right, everybody have a seat.
How long is this?
Everybody ready to go? Everybody have a seat.
How long is this?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Wait, we're missing a person. I can't
Right.
Right.
Sit down, cheers. Reform. Were you?
I had you. Sit down, Brad.
What?
Abram, son of Terah, lived in the region of Haran with his beautiful wife, Sarai. Together, they led a rather unremarkable life. But that morning, God appeared to Abram and told him to leave his country, his people, his father's household, and go to a land to be revealed later. The Lord promised many blessings in return.
Okay.
Abram attempted to explain the relocation plan to Sarai. Since he had no concrete details on the purpose or value of the move, this proved rather difficult. Regardless, Abram and Sarai packed up all of their belongings and left for the land of Canaan. But upon arrival, they found the land engulfed in famine and the local climate less than ideal.
Ew.
And the bounty promised was nowhere to be seen. Fortunately, God returned to clarify a few things. The Lord explained that this land would be given to Abram's children. Childless and well past their prime, Abram and Sarai wondered what they would do until the increasingly unlikely event of offspring occurred. Because of the famine, they decided to follow their stomachs and set out for Egypt.
Okay.
Just outside of Egypt, a grim thought suddenly occurred to Abram. Abram found Sarai to be alarmingly beautiful. Might not the men of Egypt see this foreign temptress and immediately be filled with desire? And might that desire be so intense that they would murder her husband? He knew God was supposed to be with him, but he couldn't take any chances. So Abram introduced Sarai as his sister. Pharaoh fell for their ruse, proving even too effective.
Abram, may I have your blessing to take your beautiful sister as my wife?
Oh. Okay.
Sarai was rather annoyed by this development, noting that so far neither Abram's faith or lack thereof had created much for desirable circumstances. There were numerous perks to being the Pharaoh's brother-in-law. He received sheep, camels, servants. However, the rest of Pharaoh's household did not fare as well under the deceitful arrangement. The Lord engulfed the line of Pharaoh in pestilence and disease. Knowing that she was to blame, Sarai
Abram's my husband.
eventually told the truth. Pharaoh was none too pleased.
Who's your dog in the mouth?
For years, Sarai and Abram had attempted to conceive, but to no avail. Without children, Abram could not receive the Lord's bounty. Sarai suggested Abram bed with her handmaiden, Hagar, to expedite the process.
Okay. 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 Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
The plan was a success. Abraham was given his first son, Ishmael. Though it was her idea, Sarai was immediately jealous. Shortly after this, God clarified to Abram some key elements of the covenant. First of all, their names would change. Abram to Abraham, and Sarai to Sarah.
Okay.
Second, Abraham must circumcise himself, the men of his household, and all of his male descendants.
Okay.
This was the first time the word circumcision had been used, let alone the act. So naturally, God had to provide Abraham with a short tutorial. As with every new surgical method, the first few procedures were touch and go.
Okay.
In turn, God promised to fulfill God's part of the covenant, stating that Sarah would have a son.
Okay.
In 1 year's time, God's promise was fulfilled. The now profoundly old couple named their son Isaac. It was a joyous occasion. However, Isaac's birth created new complications. Sarah told Abraham to get rid of Hagar and her son Ishmael, for he would not share in Isaac's inheritance. Abraham attempted to save the situation, but Sarah was adamant.
Okay.
Abraham tried to explain the situation to Hagar and Ishmael. The Lord assured Abraham that Ishmael would be provided for, that the son of his maidservant would become a nation as well. But the Lord's reassurance did little to lighten Abraham's heart. When Isaac was 12, the Lord instructed Abraham to take his beloved son to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him as a burnt offering.
Okay.
Golly, are we going camping, Dad? Oh, I get it. You're building an altar for sacrifice. But Dad, where's the lamb for the burnt offering?
Between his bewildering sobs, Abraham explained to Isaac that God would provide a lamb for sacrifice.
Oh, wow, Dad. That looks pretty sharp.
At the last possible moment, the Lord intervened and told Abraham not to lay a hand upon the boy.
Okay. Woo! Okay.
Abraham confirmed his faith. He had withheld nothing from the Lord, not even his beloved son.
Gee willikers, Dad. A ram. Can we sacrifice it?
Oh, okay.
And as the Lord promised, the descendants of Abraham spread throughout the land, numbering greater than the stars, and all nations were blessed through his offspring.
Okay.
Of course. Really? There was a really. Is there
That was a
really
really
a
little
Mine ate the rat.
Wait, I have a question.
Not today.
You still have this regular outside shirt? It's okay, I still have all my shirts, my blanket. Can we go outside, please? Can we go outside? Are we gonna go outside at some point today?
Almost.
We're not going outside.
And I changed chairs. This chair is too little.
No.
Okay, I don't need this right now. But we can turn this off.
What are you doing?
What's it not doing?
Messing with my stuff. I'm moving it.
All right, let's refocus.
Okay.
Turn our attention back to Keisha.
Click.
You still have it. Where is Megan?
Just like slow these open.
Why? Where's Megan? Oh, dude. I need to open it.
Okay. So, Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar. That was kind of a weird relationship, huh? Yep. Yes.
It's kind of like a
Good.
So when God promised Abraham a son, Abram kind of decided to take matters into his own hands, and Sarai as well. She told Abraham to do this. He had a son with one of his servants. What did God think about that?
Well,
God kind of was like, okay. God had to redirect Abram, and that's when he renamed them. What did he rename them? Abraham and Sarah. So this is a start, new name, new life. Okay, this happens a couple of times in the Bible. In the New Testament, does anybody know one of the people whose name was changed?
Saul to Paul.
Saul to Paul.
Yes.
That was very important.
What was his name? I remember it changed to like. What is
So,
what is circumcision? Really?
Pastor Travis.
I think I know. I know.
Circumcision is a physical mark on the body. It is the cutting of the foreskin off of the penis.
Oh,
So,
snap.
in the ancient world, it became a symbol. It was an outward symbol that defined the people of God. We don't necessarily understand why this occurred.
Okay.
Exactly. You see Abraham's response. But it became an identification.
Okay.
You ask the question, listen to the answer.
It became an identification of the covenant with God's people. It was one of the things that separated them from other groups of people in the world. Now, our society doesn't function in the same way that it used to. We don't have social interaction in a way that they did at that time. At that time, you probably saw each other uncovered in public baths. They didn't have private showers in their house. You would have to go to a public bath. And so that marker was in, it was very clear, you are a part of this group of people. All right? And so that was a definitive aspect of who they were as God's people. Now, we also, when we get into the New Testament, we get into the debate of, does this mark, is it required anymore? That's one of the arguments in the Jewish-Gentile debate, like in Acts and some of Paul's letters, and we'll get to that, but we're going to get to it in the spring. But yeah, sign of that covenant.
So when God asked Abraham to become circumcised and to circumcise everybody in his house, any servant that they took from somewhere else, what did Abraham do?
Okay.
He did it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why in this video, Abraham's key phrase was okay. Because God asked
Yes, ma'am.
and Abraham did it.
When
When yeah. Yeah. So
don't ask any more embarrassing questions.
So does anybody remember what Abraham's son with Hagar? Who knows that name?
Hagar?
Hagar was the servant that Abraham had a child with first. Ishmael. And then God told Abraham No, I'm
Did
going
he
the
do
wrong
that to
one.
his son?
That he would have his own son. What did Sarah do when she heard this?
You're funny.
She got jealous.
She laughed. She laughed when God told her that she was going to have a child. Because she was 90 years old. Okay? How old were those men that we were talking about when they had a child? 30. 29, early 30s.
The guy didn't have a child.
Sarah, I know.
One was 70.
Sarah was 90 years old. So think of the oldest lady that you know, and imagine her becoming pregnant. Abraham was 100 when who was born? Who knows his other son's name?
Isaac.
Isaac. So continuing with this covenant, what did God promise to Abraham?
Kids, land.
Children, land.
Annoying people.
Name, praise. His name would be remembered. Okay? And what did Abraham do? What have we talked about? What did Abraham do in that covenant? Yes, he said okay. So when then Isaac was 13, 12, 13,
12.
God asked Abraham to sacrifice him. So remember when we talked about sacrifice? What animal did they give?
Lamb,
Sheep.
their
best. Their best. Okay? So God asked Abraham to kill his son Isaac. And what did Abraham say?
Okay. Wait, what?
Okay. Yeah, he was kind of like, okay, God. But again, he did it. He did it. He fulfilled his part of the covenant. And then what happened when he was about
He stopped him.
to? He stopped him. Good.
And up here. Well, if he would have had common sense, he would have realized that God said you'll have as many descendants as the stars. So if he would have forgot that, then he wouldn't have he would have known that God would have stopped him. Because you can have so many descendants when you don't have any kids.
Well, he actually did have another kid. What was his name?
Jonah!
Ishmael.
Well, yeah, but if he didn't have that kid, then Sarah's stupid idea.
So that story in Genesis chapter 22 is called the binding of Isaac. That's where Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice his son. A story that demonstrates a great deal of trust on Abraham's part, right? Finally, the covenant seems to be working itself out. And then God asks Abraham to do something that just seems ridiculous, seems almost unthinkable. Scholars and people, since that story was told and written down, have been debating what does this mean. Jewish scholars, Christian scholars, people have done a lot of thinking about this story. There's actually really great depth of stories that have been told around this. One of my favorite ones, in the Jewish tradition, the rabbis would tell stories. It's called the Midrash. They would tell stories about, okay, what was going on around this time. They would interpret things. And one of the Midrashes on the story of the binding of Isaac is that on the sixth day of creation, at the very end of the day, God created the ram and put it in that bush to wait until the time when Abraham would need it. We don't know if that happened, but that was one of the stories that was told.
That would be awesome.
The rabbis were thinking, how could this possibly be? And, that God, even way back at creation, had known that this moment was coming, and that Abraham would trust, and that there would need to be a ram. So it just shows the depth of that story. But again, it communicates the covenant that's made, that Abraham, over and over again, trusts that God is going to work that covenant, that God is going to reveal the promise. Right? Great deal of trust in that relationship.
So, were Abraham and Sarah perfect? No, not at all. Did they always do exactly what God was telling them? No. Sometimes they misinterpreted things. They were definitely not perfect. But no matter what they did, God still fulfilled that covenant that he made with them. So Who recognizes this?
Bible.
No, it's a hymnal. It's a hymnal.
Yes, this is the hymnal that we use in church. In here,
Please don't make us sing.
there's different services. We're going to look really quick at part of the service of baptism, the affirmation of baptism. Can somebody read something for me?
Yes.
No.
So the affirmation of baptism is what we use in the confirmation service. So at the end of the year, we're going to do this when some of you are confirmed.
1,
Right?
2, 3, 4.
So, read for us, Luke. Alright, everybody listen.
You have made public professions of your faith. You intend to continue in the convent God made you in holy baptism, to live among God's faithful people.
Beautiful. To live among God's faithful people. So what is God calling us to do?
Live among God's faithful people.
Live among God's faithful people. So Sarah and Abraham were by no means perfect. But were they faithful? Yes. Same thing. We are all faithful people, but what do?
We mess up.
We mess up. We break that connection with God. We break that connection with each other, okay? But God is calling us to live among God's faithful people. So no matter if we sin, if we mess up, if we misinterpret God, even though we're not perfect, God is still calling us to do things despite our imperfections. Okay?
Hey, are we going outside?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I didn't want to go outside.
Briar, we're not going outside. Let it
Y'all have
go.
so much hope, it's inspiring.
We need to have like an off
Am I on?
day. The boy that had so
Okay.
much hope.
All right.
We did.
Yeah,
Last week.
I do have a lot of hope, but yes.
Alright, a few more minutes here.
It's just trying to get
Yes, again.
Thanks, y'all are paying good attention tonight. I need you for another 15 minutes or so, okay? We're going to talk about
And then where are we going?
hope
Outside?
outside.
Yes, we are
Finally
going
going
outside.
outside. Alright. Give me a few more minutes of focus. So, we just talked about in that affirmation of baptism service, that promise, the covenant that was made between God and us at baptism. That covenant that has already taken place in our lives. Part of that promise is that we live among God's faithful people. And there are all kinds of faithful people in this world. We're going to talk just a little bit, because we ought to, about Ishmael and the descendants of Ishmael. And because there's a promise there as well. Abraham's worried. He doesn't want to send away his other son. There's a strong connection, a strong relationship there. And Abraham's worried. Doesn't want anything to happen to them. But what does God promise in that moment? Anybody know? Everything's going to be okay. Promises actually that Ishmael is going to be a great nation. All right? And here's where we have what's understood as the beginning of another great religion in the world. Islam. So, what we have, yes?
Can I do something really quick?
Yep.
Okay, so 3 of the major world religions, okay, what are we?
Christian.
Christians.
Judaism.
Yes, Judaism.
Muslim. Muslim. It's Judaism. And Muslim or Islamic?
It's Islam. They are known, people of the Islamic faith are known as Muslims, okay? What do these 3 all have in common?
They all people. They all believe in God.
Kind of. They are all Abrahamic.
What?
Abrahamic religions. So they all descend from who? Abraham.
No. It can't be.
What was Abraham?
Yep.
Wait,
Okay.
where did Judas
So, a little bit of history here. So Judaism, the Jewish people, they come first. They're the ones that this original covenant, the thing we've been talking about, the covenant with Abraham, that's the shaping of the Jewish people. All right? We come, Jesus comes and is still participating in what's going on, but does something new. God does something new in the world through Jesus, and we confess Jesus to be the Messiah, the Christ. Jesus is the Savior of the world. And so we are Christians in that line. Hagar's son, Abraham's son, Ishmael, starts this movement, all right? The people of the Muslim faith trace their roots back to Ishmael. So we're going to talk just a little bit about that because there's lots of misconceptions, all right? So, some basics on Islam. Islam means submission to God. That's what it means. Islam means submission to God. It's a straight path, all right? Their faith sees themselves as a straight path to God. A Muslim is one who submits to God. So Islam is the name of the religion. Muslim is a person who practices Islam. It is a person who submits their life to God. They also hold that God is at the center. All right? Islam begins in the 7th century, so we're talking 600-700 years after Jesus with the Prophet Muhammad. Have y'all heard of the Prophet Muhammad? Yep. Okay. So starts 7th century after the time of Jesus. So we're all part of the same origins in Abraham. All right? The Quran. Anybody heard of the Quran? The holy book of Islam acknowledges a lot of what we know in the Bible. It talks about the Old Testament, talks about the patriarchs, Abraham, talks about the prophets. The Quran mentions Jesus 93 times. All right? We share this story. Okay?
How do you know that?
I took a class on it. All right. I do. So, in Islam, they have many different prophets and poets just like we do, very, very rich tradition, but they understand Jesus to be an important prophet. They don't hold Jesus as high in regard as the Son of God as we do, but they still understand him. Listen to this poem by a guy by the name of Rumi. He talks about Jesus. I called through your door. The mystics are gathering in the streets. Come out. You say, leave me alone, I'm sick. I don't care if you're dead. Jesus is here, and he wants to resurrect somebody. So, they understand Jesus to be of great importance. They remember him in the writings. They celebrate his life. There's lots of misconceptions about Islam in our society. What are some of the things that you hear in the news right now? There's lots of fear.
ISIS.
That they're bad, right? ISIS.
I gotta show you something.
They're connected. All right, they're connected to that. ISIS, there was an article that came out last week. Islamic scholars in the United States wrote a statement that says, you are not practicing what we have in the Quran. They are not practicing their faith. So, let's put phones away, please.
Yes,
put phones away, please. All right. So, from the scholars, the people who are study and knowledgeable, they are condemning ISIS for not practicing their faith. The only equivalent I could think of in Christianity right now is the Ku Klux Klan. Have y'all heard of them?
KKK.
They are they consider themselves a Christian organization. That's the same level of terrorism and hatred as ISIS is. All right? The Ku Klux Klan is not a Christian organization, yet they claim to act in the name of God and in the name of Jesus, and they do some really, really awful things. They do really, really, really terrible things in the name of God. That's kind of what ISIS is. There's this radical group that don't function as practicing people of their faith.
Like, a long time ago, like the Holy Wars of the land, which was the Islamic against the Holy Crusaders, which were Christians.
Yeah, that was the Crusades. Y'all are probably going to study those in world history. That's a really, really, really sad time for Christianity. There's lots of killing in the name of God, lots of bloodshed and bad things on both sides. Things that we wish never would have happened in our history. Very, very dark times. And so what we learned from that is, one, not to do it, and two, how do we stop stuff like that from happening again? And so it's learning about people of other faith, building relationships that helps us to not repeat the mistakes of the past. Cora.
Oh, why haven't we gone into our small groups yet?
Huh?
We haven't gone into our small groups. Like, we're to talk about our highs and lows.
Right, we're going to do that in just a second, but I want to do some of this basic stuff and put it out there.
Are we doing it outside?
No. Wait.
I have a question. What time do you get out of here?
What time is
Let's listen.
All right, so just a few things I want to give you about how people practice their faith as Muslims. So, what they have is called 5 pillars. One of them is called the Shahada, and it's just a profession of faith. Every time they pray this prayer. I bear the witness that there is no God but God, That's something we confess. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is God's messenger. They profess their faith. It's a similar pattern to what we do. We confess there is no God but God. That's one of the 5 pillars. The second one is salat, and this is where they pray 5 times a day. They pray in the morning, they pray at noon, in the afternoon, in evening, and then at nightfall. Does anybody know how they pray? Has anybody seen this?
Yes, they bow.
Okay, so they kneel down on mats, they take off their shoes, they point themselves in a particular direction. Does anybody know?
East.
Okay, maybe east from here, but where are they orienting themselves?
East, west, or north? Not south, I know that.
Okay, they're pointing themselves to Mecca. They're pointing themselves to where Muhammad received his visions. They're pointing themselves back to where Abraham was traveling around, all right? That's the center of where God has met them in the world, and so wherever they are in the world, they face that direction. I don't know if I could find Jerusalem right now. If we had to pray facing Jerusalem, I don't know which way we would pray. But the practicing people of the Islamic faith, they know this, and every time they pray, they face that direction. So that's the second pillar. The third one is zakat, and it's purification. This is how they share their resources. They pay out of their earnings, so like we tithe, we bring our offerings to church. They do the same thing. They give an offering to support the life of the community. It helps other folks to have resources. It helps to support people who are in need. A similar pattern to what we do. Not all that different from us bringing an offering to church. The third one is Swam. And this is what we would know as Ramadan. It's their festival. There's a lot of fasting. It's actually going on this time of the year. It's a fast that helps them to remain faithful. It reminds them of the sacrifices that they have made. It reminds them of their relationship with God. We have great festivals that we celebrate. Christmas, Easter. Oktoberfest is a secular one.
What are you talking about?
So, it's a way that they pattern their lives. The fifth one is the Hajj. And this is the one that you may have heard of. They go to Mecca. It's the great pilgrimage. At one point in your life, you journey to Mecca and you participate in the festivals there. So those are the 5 pillars. We could spend a lot of time talking about how they practice their faith. But what I want to communicate to you is that that promise that we make to live faithfully among God's people. Brothers and sisters of Islam, our Muslim brothers and sisters, are part of the Abrahamic story. They're part of who we are. And so living among God's faithful people, or living faithfully amongst God's people, takes our relationships not only with our Christian brothers and sisters, but also with our Jewish brothers and sisters and our Muslim brothers and sisters. God's people all over the world. All right? We have a really, really, really large connection. So, we're going to break into our small groups here at the end.